I never thought I would come home from a month-long business trip to find a massive luxury lodge sitting on my land. But there I was, staring at what looked like a five-star resort cabin where my empty field used to be. My name is Quinton Richardson, and I own 40 acres of prime woodland property just outside Asheville, North Carolina. I bought the land 5 years ago with money I inherited from my grandfather, and I'd been slowly saving up to build my dream home on it. The property was beautiful, untouched forest, with a small clearing where I had planned to eventually construct a modest cabin. I lived in a rental apartment in town while I worked as a construction project manager, putting away money every month for my future build. I'd left for Seattle in early March to oversee a major commercial development project. The job was supposed to take 3 weeks, but ended up stretching to almost 5. During that time, I had limited cell service at the remote construction site, and I barely checked my mail or emails except for work-related communications. It was exhausting work, 12-hour days, 7 days a week, but the pay was incredible, and it would bring me that much closer to breaking ground on my own place. When I finally drove up the long gravel road to my property on that warm April afternoon, I thought I had taken a wrong turn. There, sitting in the middle of my clearing, was an enormous luxury lodge. I'm talking about a 2-story timber frame masterpiece with wrap-around porches, floor-to-ceiling windows, stone chimneys at both ends, and what looked like a professional landscaping job complete with ornamental shrubs and a stone pathway leading to the front entrance. I pulled my truck to a stop and just sat there with my mouth open. The building had to be at least 4,000 square feet. The timber framing alone probably cost more than I made in a year. Solar panels lined the south-facing roof. There was even a fancy mailbox at the entrance to the property with some kind of decorative ironwork. I got out of my truck slowly, my legs stiff from the long drive, and walked toward the structure. As I got closer, I could see that the windows were fitted with custom shutters, and the stonework on the chimneys was intricate and expensive looking. Someone had spent serious money on this building. My first thought was that there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe a construction crew had gotten their GPS coordinates wrong and built on my land by accident. It seemed impossible, but what other explanation could there be? I walked up the stone pathway and tried the front door. It was locked, but through the windows I could see the interior was fully furnished. Leather furniture, a massive stone fireplace, hardwood floors, a chandelier made of antlers hanging in what looked like the great room. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall. I could see into what appeared to be a gourmet kitchen with stainless steel appliances and granite countertops. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Pete Martinez, who lived about a mile down the road. Pete was retired and spent most of his time on his own property. If anyone knew what had happened here, it would be him. "Pete, it's Quinton," I said when he answered. "I just got back from Seattle. Can you tell me why there's a massive lodge sitting on my land?" There was a pause. "Oh boy," Pete said. "You have not heard?" "Heard what? I've been out of cell range for weeks." "The HOA built it," Pete said. "They have been working on it for about a month now. They just finished last week." I felt my blood pressure rising. "What HOA? My property is not part of any HOA." "That's what I told them," Pete said. "But that woman, Sharon, she insisted your land was part of Pine Ridge Estates and that you had agreed to let them build a community lodge on your property." Sharon Mitchell. I should have known. She was the president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, a development that bordered my property to the south. She was in her late 40s, had that distinctive haircut that seemed to be a requirement for her type, and she drove a white Lexus SUV with more bumper stickers about community standards than should be legal. I had met her exactly once, about 2 years ago, when she had shown up at my property uninvited to inform me that my land was bringing down property values because I had not cleared the brush near the border between my land and the development. I had politely told her that my land was not part of her HOA and that I would manage it however I saw fit. She had not taken it well. "Pete, my property is definitely not part of Pine Ridge Estates. I have the deed. I have never signed any HOA agreement." "I figured as much," Pete said. "But Sharon had all these papers and plans, and she had contractors out there within days. I stopped by to ask what was going on, but she told me to mind my own business. I tried calling you, but it went to voicemail every time." My phone barely worked out there, I said. This is insane. They built an entire building on my land without permission? A very expensive building from what I could see, Pete said. They had trucks coming and going for weeks. Lumber deliveries, stonework, furniture, the works. Must have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I thanked Pete and hung up. My hands were shaking with anger and disbelief. This was not just some small mistake. This was a massive construction project on private property. This was trespassing, destruction of property, and probably a dozen other crimes I could not even think of at the moment. I took photos of everything. The building from every angle, the landscaping, the mailbox, the stone pathway. I documented everything I could see through the windows. Then I got back in my truck and drove straight to the Henderson County Sheriff's Office. At the sheriff's office, I asked to speak with someone about a property crime. A deputy named Travis Cooper took me into a small interview room and listened as I explained the situation. So you were telling me that someone built an entire lodge on your property without your knowledge or permission? Deputy Cooper asked, writing notes on a pad. That is exactly what I am telling you, I said. I have the deed to prove it is my land. I have never given anyone permission to build anything on my property. And you have been gone for how long? Almost 5 weeks. I left in early March for a work project in Seattle. Deputy Cooper nodded. And you were saying the HOA did this? Pine Ridge Estates? That's what my neighbor told me. The HOA president is a woman named Sharon Mitchell. Deputy Cooper's expression changed slightly. I am familiar with Mrs. Mitchell. She has called us a few times about various neighborhood disputes. The way he said it made it clear that Sharon's calls were not always taken seriously. Can you come out to the property with me? I asked. I want this documented officially. Let me get a senior deputy and we will head out there right now, Deputy Cooper said. 20 minutes later, I was back at my property with Deputy Cooper and another deputy, Sandra Hayes. They walked around the lodge, took their own photos, and examined the structure. This is a substantial building, Deputy Hayes said. This would have required permits from the county. Let me make some calls. She stepped away and spent several minutes on her radio. When she came back, her expression was serious. No permits were ever filed for construction at this address, she said. This is an unpermitted structure, which is a violation right there. Combined with the trespassing and unauthorized construction, we've got multiple crimes here. What do we do now? I asked. First, we need to confirm the property boundaries, Deputy Hayes said. Do you have a survey? I have one back at my apartment. It is in my property documents. Go get it. Bring all your documentation that proves you own this land and that you never gave permission for any of this. Meet us at the station in an hour and we will start building a case. I drove back to my apartment in town, my mind racing. This was surreal. How could someone think they had the right to build something like this on someone else's property? The arrogance of it was staggering. At my apartment, I dug through my file cabinet and pulled out everything I had related to the property. The deed, the original survey, the title insurance documents, the property tax records. Everything clearly showed that I, Quinton Richardson, was the sole owner of those 40 acres. I also found something else. Buried in a stack of mail that had accumulated while I was gone was a letter from Sharon Mitchell, dated early March. I ripped it open and read it. The letter informed me that the Pine Ridge Estates HOA had voted to include my property in their jurisdiction, and that they would be constructing a community amenity lodge on my land for the benefit of all HOA members. The letter claimed that because my property bordered the HOA development, I was automatically subject to their bylaws. It cited several nonsensical legal references and ended with a statement that construction would begin immediately. The letter was complete garbage legally. You could not just declare someone else's property to be part of your HOA. That was not how property law worked, but it showed premeditation. Sharon had sent me this letter, probably knowing I would not get it in time to create some kind of paper trail suggesting she had notified me. I took photos of the letter and brought the original with me back to the sheriff's office. Deputy Hayes read the letter and shook her head. This is not legal. You cannot annex someone's property into an HOA without their consent and without proper legal procedures. This letter does not change anything. So what happens now? I asked. Now we go have a conversation with Sharon Mitchell, Deputy Hayes said. Would you like to be there when we do? Absolutely, I said. We drove to Sharon's house in Pine Ridge Estates. It was exactly what I expected. A large two-story colonial with perfect landscaping and a 3-car garage. Sharon's white Lexus was parked in the driveway. Deputy Hayes knocked on the door. After a moment, Sharon opened it. She was wearing yoga pants and a designer fleece jacket. Her highlighted hair was pulled back in a ponytail. When she saw me standing behind the deputies, her eyes narrowed. "Can I help you, officers?" she asked in that overly sweet voice that certain people use when they think they are in the right. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am Deputy Hayes and this is Deputy Cooper. We need to talk to you about a construction project on Mr. Richardson's property." "Oh, you mean the community lodge?" Sharon said, smiling. "It turned out beautifully, did it not? The members of our HOA are thrilled." "Mrs. Mitchell, that lodge was built on Mr. Richardson's private property without his permission," Deputy Hayes said. "Did you authorize that construction?" "Of course I did," Sharon said, still smiling. "As president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, I have the authority to approve community projects. The lodge is a valuable amenity for our residents." "But it is not on HOA property," I said, unable to stay quiet. "It is on my land, my private property that has nothing to do with your HOA." Sharon looked at me like I was a child who did not understand basic concepts. "Your property borders Pine Ridge Estates. According to our bylaws, any property within 500 feet of our development can be incorporated into the HOA for community benefit purposes. We voted on it at our monthly meeting in February." "That is not legal," Deputy Hayes said. "You cannot incorporate someone's private property into your HOA without their consent. Mr. Richardson never agreed to be part of your HOA, and he never gave permission for any construction on his land." Sharon's smile faded. "I sent him a letter." "A letter is not legal consent," Deputy Hayes said. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have committed several crimes here. Trespassing, unauthorized construction, building without permits. This is serious." "Crimes?" Sharon laughed. "That is ridiculous. I was acting in my official capacity as HOA president. Everything was approved by our board." "Your board does not have authority over Mr. Richardson's property," Deputy Cooper said. "You build a structure on land you do not own without the owner's permission. That is illegal." Sharon's face was getting red now. "This is absurd. I've done everything by the book. Our HOA attorney reviewed everything." "What attorney?" Deputy Hayes asked. Sharon hesitated. "Well, we consulted with someone." "I'm going to need that attorney's name and contact information," Deputy Hayes said. "Mrs. Mitchell, we are going to need you to come down to the station to answer some more questions." "Am I being arrested?" Sharon asked, her voice rising. "Not at this moment," Deputy Hayes said, "but we are conducting an investigation into this matter and we need your full cooperation." Sharon crossed her arms. "I am not going anywhere without my attorney present." "That is your right," Deputy Hayes said, "but you need to understand the seriousness of this situation. A substantial structure was built on private property without authorization. The costs involved are significant. This could be charged as felony trespassing and felony property damage depending on the value of the structure." I could see the realization slowly dawning on Sharon's face that this might actually be a problem for her. "I will have my attorney contact you," she said stiffly, and closed the door. We walked back to the patrol car. "What happens now?" I asked Deputy Hayes. "We continue the investigation," she said. "We will need to get estimates on the value of the structure. We will need to interview the contractors who did the work. We will need to talk to other members of the HOA board to see who else was involved in this decision. This is going to take some time." "What about the lodge?" I asked. "Can I have it removed?" "That is a civil matter," Deputy Hayes said. "You can have it removed, but I would recommend waiting until the criminal investigation is complete. The structure is evidence. Also, if they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars building it, you might want to talk to an attorney about your options. They might be required to leave it and pay you for the land, or they might have to pay to have it removed. There are a lot of legal questions here." "I need to hire a lawyer," I said. "Yes, you do," Deputy Hayes agreed. "A good property attorney. This is a complicated case." I went home and spent the rest of the evening researching lawyers. I found a firm in Asheville that specialized in property disputes and HOA issues. I called first thing the next morning and made an appointment with an attorney named Rebecca Torres. Rebecca's office was in downtown Asheville, in a renovated historic building. She was in her 30s, sharply dressed, and had a reputation for taking on HOA cases. I spent an hour explaining everything to her while she took notes. "This is one of the most egregious cases I've ever heard," Rebecca said when I finished. "HOAs overstep their bounds all the time, but I have never seen one actually build a major structure on non-member property." "What are my options?" I asked. "You have several," Rebecca said. "First, you can demand they remove the structure at their expense and compensate you for the damage to your land. Second, you can force them to pay you the full value of the land the structure sits on, effectively making them buy that portion of your property. Third, you can sue for damages, including punitive damages for the willful nature of the trespass. My recommendation would be to pursue all three simultaneously and see what shakes out." "How much is this going to cost me?" "I will be honest, it is not cheap," Rebecca said, "but given the value of what they built, I would be willing to take this on a contingency basis. If we win, I take a percentage of the settlement or judgment. If we lose, you do not pay me anything except for filing fees and direct costs." "What percentage?" 30% of any recovery." I thought about it. I did not have a lot of money to throw around on legal fees, and a contingency agreement made sense given the circumstances. "Okay, let us do it," Rebecca smiled. "Great. I will draw up the retainer agreement. In the meantime, I'm going to send a demand letter to the HOA and to Sharon Mitchell personally. We are going to make it very clear what they have done and what we expect them to do about it." Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Rebecca sent her demand letter, which laid out in explicit legal terms that the HOA had committed trespass, built without permits, and damaged my property. The letter demanded that the HOA either remove the structure within 30 days or pay me $500,000 for the portion of land the structure occupied, plus an additional $200,000 in damages and legal fees. Sharon's response came through her attorney, a guy named Gerald Pemberton, who apparently specialized in HOA law. His letter was dismissive and condescending. It claimed that the HOA had acted within its rights, that my property had been properly incorporated into the HOA through established procedures, and that I had been properly notified. It offered to grant me reciprocal use privileges for the lodge as a gesture of goodwill. Rebecca laughed when she read it. "This guy has no idea what he's dealing with. They do not have a leg to stand on." "So what do we do?" "We file suit," Rebecca said. "We are going to take them to court and we are going to win." The lawsuit was filed in Henderson County Superior Court. We sued the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, Sharon Mitchell personally, and the other members of the HOA board who had voted to approve the construction. We asked for compensatory damages, punitive damages, and an injunction requiring the removal of the structure. The local news picked up on the story. It was too bizarre not to cover. "HOA builds luxury lodge on non-members' property," was the headline in the Asheville Citizen-Times. A reporter came out to interview me and take photos of the lodge. I gave her the full story. Within days, the story had gone regional, then national. Good Morning America did a segment on it. It became a meme on social media. HOA horror stories were apparently very popular content, and mine was particularly outrageous. The publicity was not good for Sharon or the HOA. Residents of Pine Ridge Estates started asking questions. How much had the lodge cost? Who had approved spending that kind of money? Why had no one questioned whether they actually had the right to build on my land? It turned out that Sharon had not been entirely forthcoming with the HOA members. According to documents Rebecca obtained through discovery, Sharon had told the board that my property had been donated to the HOA for the lodge. She had shown them a forged document that appeared to be a property transfer from me to the HOA. Several board members later claimed they had never seen the actual deed and had taken Sharon's word that everything was legitimate. The forged document was a bombshell. It elevated this from a civil dispute to criminal fraud. Deputy Hayes obtained a warrant for Sharon's arrest. I was not there when they arrested her, but I heard about it. Apparently, she had screamed and cried and insisted it was all a misunderstanding. She was booked on charges of fraud, forgery, and felony trespassing. Her bail was set at $50,000. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Sharon as president. They also voted to accept liability for the lodge situation and to negotiate a settlement with me. Their insurance company got involved, and suddenly everyone was very eager to make this go away. But I was not in a hurry. Rebecca had advised me to let them sweat a little. The longer the lodge sat there, fully furnished and decorated, the more expensive it became to resolve. They had gone ahead and finished all the interior work, added high-end furnishings, stocked the kitchen, even put art on the walls. Every day that went by was another day of evidence showing just how much they had spent on my property without permission. I went back to the lodge several times while the legal process played out. Each time I saw something new. They had installed a hot tub on the back deck. There was a fire pit with Adirondack chairs. The basement, which I had not even known existed at first, was finished as a game room with a pool table, a bar, and a big screen TV. The place had cost at least $700,000, maybe more. Rebecca kept pushing in court. The HOA's attorneys tried various defenses, but none of them held up. They argued that I had abandoned the property because I had not built on it. The judge shot that down immediately. They argued that my property should have been included in the HOA when Pine Ridge Estates was developed because of its proximity. The judge cited case law showing that was not how property law worked. They even tried to argue that the lodge was actually on HOA property and that the survey I had provided was wrong. The judge ordered an independent survey, which confirmed that the lodge was entirely on my 40 acres. 3 months after I first discovered the lodge, we went to mediation. The HOA's insurance company sent a representative. The HOA board members were there, looking nervous and defeated. Sharon was not present. She was still fighting the criminal charges separately. The insurance rep got right to the point. "What do you want, Mr. Richardson?" Rebecca had coached me on this. "I want $1 million in damages. I want the HOA to pay all my legal fees, and I want a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from ever claiming any authority over my property." The rep winced. "That is quite a bit more than the structure cost to build. The structure cost more than you think once you factor in everything," Rebecca said. "But beyond the direct costs, there are punitive damages for the willful nature of the trespass, damages for the forged documents, damages for the stress and inconvenience to my client. A jury would likely award even more than we are asking." "What about the lodge itself?" the rep asked. "My client will keep it," Rebecca said. "Consider it partial payment." There was a lot of back and forth. The insurance company did not want to pay $1 million. They offered $600,000. We countered at $900,000. They came back at $750,000. We settled at $850,000 plus all legal fees, plus I kept the lodge. The agreement was formalized 2 weeks later. The HOA transferred all rights to the lodge to me. They paid $850,000. They paid Rebecca's fees, which came out to about $90,000. And they signed an agreement acknowledging that my property was not and never had been part of Pine Ridge Estates. Sharon's criminal case took longer. She eventually pleaded guilty to fraud and forgery charges. The prosecutor had recommended jail time, but her attorney worked out a deal. She got 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership position. She also had to pay restitution to the HOA for the money they had spent on the settlement. Her husband filed for divorce about a month after the criminal case concluded. As for me, I suddenly had $850,000 in a luxury lodge on my property. After Rebecca took her 30% contingency fee, I was left with about $600,000 in cash. Combined with what I had already saved, I had enough to pay off the land, pay the property taxes for years to come, and still have a substantial nest egg. The lodge itself was a strange windfall. I had not wanted or asked for it, but now that it was legally mine, I had to figure out what to do with it. It was too big for just me. I thought about selling it, but it was built on my land and I did not really want to sell the land. I thought about renting it out, but that seemed like a hassle. Then Pete gave me an idea. "You should turn it into a wedding venue," he said one evening when we were sitting on the lodge's back deck. "This place is beautiful. People would pay good money to have their weddings here." I had not considered that, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. The lodge was perfect for events. The great room could easily hold 100 people. The kitchen was commercial grade. The grounds were gorgeous, and Asheville was a popular destination for weddings anyway. I hired an event planner to help me set it up. We got the proper licenses and insurance. We created a website and started marketing. Within 6 months, I had bookings through the next year. The income from the venue rental more than covered the property taxes and maintenance, and I was making a profit on top of that. I also finally built my own cabin on a different part of the 40 acres, far from the lodge. Nothing as fancy as the lodge, just a nice 2-bedroom place that felt like home. I quit my job as a project manager and ran the venue full-time. It was less money than I had been making, but it was my own business and I was my own boss. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after the whole mess started, I was at the lodge setting up for a wedding when a car pulled up. A woman got out. She was in her 30s, attractive, with dark hair and a warm smile. She walked up to me and extended her hand. "Hi, I am looking for Quinton Richardson. I am Olivia Davis. I'm the bride getting married here this evening." I shook her hand. "That is me. Welcome. Let me show you around." I gave Olivia and her family a tour of the lodge. They loved everything about it. As we walked, Olivia's mother asked about the building. "It is such a unique property," she said. "How did you end up with this place?" I smiled. "That's a long story. Let us just say it fell into my lap unexpectedly." The wedding that night was beautiful. Olivia and her husband were happy, the guests had a great time, and I made sure everything went perfectly. As I watched the reception from the back of the room, I thought about how strange life could be. A year ago, I had been furious and stressed, dealing with an HOA that had massively overstepped and committed crimes on my property. Now, I was running a successful business in a building I never asked for, but had grown to appreciate. After the reception ended and everyone had left, I walked through the lodge turning off lights. The place really was beautiful, I had to admit. The craftsmanship was excellent, the design was thoughtful. Sharon and her HOA had spent a fortune building something truly special. They had just made the catastrophic mistake of building it on someone else's land. I thought about Sharon sometimes. I had heard through the grapevine that she had moved out of Pine Ridge Estates, unable to face her former neighbors after everything that had happened. Her life had imploded because of her arrogance and her willingness to commit fraud to get what she wanted. I did not feel sorry for her. She had made her choices. The HOA had also changed after the incident. The new board president, a retired accountant named Tom Chen, had implemented strict oversight procedures, no major expenditures without member approval, no legal actions without consulting an attorney first, no more taking any president's word that something was legal or appropriate. The lodge incident had become a cautionary tale in HOA management circles. Rebecca told me she'd been invited to speak at several conferences about the case. As for Pete, he became a regular visitor to the lodge. He helped me maintain the grounds and set up for events. He also became something of a local celebrity because of his role in the story. When reporters had come around, Pete had given colorful quotes about watching the construction happen and thinking something was not right. He enjoyed the attention. The following spring, I got a call from a producer at a national news magazine show. They wanted to do a follow-up piece on the story. Where was I now? What had happened to the lodge? Had there been any resolution with the HOA? I agreed to the interview. The producer and a camera crew came out to the property on a sunny May morning. We stood in front of the lodge, and I told the whole story again, from discovering the building when I got home from Seattle to the legal battle to the settlement to turning it into a wedding venue. So, in the end, the HOA's illegal actions actually made you a lot of money and gave you a new career? The producer asked. That is one way to look at it, I said. But I would have preferred they had just left my property alone. This was not how I planned to start a business. Do you have any advice for other property owners who might face HOA overreach? Document everything, I said. Know your property boundaries, read your deed, and do not be afraid to stand up for your rights. If I had not pushed back, if I had just accepted the HOA's claim that they had authority over my land, I would have lost everything. These organizations can be very intimidating, but they are not above the law. The segment aired a few weeks later. It brought in even more business for the venue. Apparently, people liked the story and wanted to have their weddings at the place with the crazy backstory. Over time, the intensity of the whole experience faded. It became just a story I told, a wild chapter in my life. But it had changed me in some ways. I was more cautious now, more aware of my rights and more willing to fight for them. I had learned that sometimes people will try to take advantage of you, will lie and cheat and commit crimes to get what they want, and your only option is to stand firm and demand justice. I also developed a reputation in the area as someone who had beaten an HOA, which led to a strange side effect. People started calling me asking for advice on their own HOA disputes. I was not a lawyer and could not give legal advice, but I could share my experience and recommend Rebecca's firm. I heard through her that several of these referrals had turned into cases and that she had won most of them. 2 years after the lodge incident, I was contacted by an author who was writing a book about HOA abuse cases. She wanted to include my story as one of the chapters. I agreed and spent several hours on the phone with her, going through all the details again. The book came out about 6 months later. My case was Chapter 7, titled The Luxury Lodge That Wasn't Theirs to Build. The book did well and brought even more attention to HOA issues. Legislators in several states started looking at HOA reform laws. North Carolina introduced a bill that would require HOAs to carry liability insurance specifically for situations where they overstepped their authority. The bill cited my case as an example of why such insurance was necessary. I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee about the bill. I took a day and drove to Raleigh. I sat in the state capitol building and told my story to a room full of legislators and their staff. I explained how Sharon had forged documents, how the HOA had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a project without proper oversight, and how the whole situation could have been prevented with better regulations. The bill passed. It was a small victory, but it meant something. It meant that other property owners in North Carolina would have some protection if their HOA went rogue the way Pine Ridge Estates had. Life settled into a routine. I ran the venue, hosted weddings and corporate retreats and family reunions. I made good money. I paid my taxes. I maintained my property. I lived in my cabin and enjoyed the peace and quiet of my 40 acres. Then, 3 years after everything started, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Sharon Mitchell. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a handwritten note on plain stationery. "Dear Mr. Richardson," it began. "I know I am probably the last person you want to hear from. I've thought about writing this letter for a long time and was not sure if I should, but I decided I needed to. I want to apologize for what I did. There is no excuse for my actions. I let my ego and my desire to create something impressive for the HOA override my judgment and my ethics. I forged that document. I lied to the board members. I trespassed on your property. I hurt a lot of people, including you, including my own family. I have spent the last 3 years in therapy trying to understand why I did what I did. I have learned a lot about myself, none of it flattering. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry and that I hope you have been able to move forward with your life." I saw the article about the wedding venue. It looks beautiful. I'm glad something good came out of the mess I created. Sincerely, Sharon Mitchell. I read the letter twice. I did not know what to make of it. Was it genuine? Was it some kind of legal strategy? I called Rebecca and read it to her. "It sounds genuine to me," Rebecca said, "and it is not a legal risk to you. The case is long over. I think she really is trying to apologize." I thought about whether to respond. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, to let Sharon stew in her guilt, but another part of me, the part that had benefited from her mistakes and moved on with my life, felt like maybe I should acknowledge her apology. I wrote back, "Sharon, I received your letter. I appreciate the apology. What you did was wrong and it caused me a lot of stress and expense, but it is over now and I have moved on. I hope you have learned from this and that you are rebuilding your life. I forgive you. Quinton Richardson." I sent the letter and did not expect to hear from her again. I did not. Years passed. The wedding venue became well established and successful. I hired a part-time assistant to help with bookings and coordination. I expanded the business to include a catering service. I built a small guest house on the property for overnight accommodations for wedding parties. The lodge that Sharon and the HOA had illegally built became the foundation of a thriving business and a good life. It was a constant reminder that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can turn into unexpected opportunities. I also got involved in property rights advocacy. I joined a statewide organization that pushed for stronger protections for landowners against HOA overreach. I spoke at meetings and conferences. I shared my story over and over, hoping it would help others avoid what I went through or give them courage to fight back if it happened to them. One evening, I was sitting on the deck of the lodge watching the sunset over the mountains. The air was cool and crisp. Birds were singing in the trees. I had a glass of bourbon in my hand and nowhere I needed to be. Life was good. Pete came walking up from his property. He did that sometimes, just wandered over to chat. He climbed the steps to the deck and sat down in the chair next to mine. "You ever think about how crazy this all was?" he asked. "All the time," I said. If someone had told you 5 years ago that you would end up with a luxury lodge and a successful business because an HOA president went crazy and built on your land, would you have believed it? "Not in a million years," I said. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn orange and purple and finally dark blue. "You did good, Quinton," Pete said. "You could have just been angry and demanded they tear it down, but you played it smart. You turned a disaster into something positive." "I had good help," I said. "Rebecca was amazing. Deputy Hayes took it seriously. The judge understood property law. A lot of things could have gone wrong." "But they did not," Pete said. "That is the point. You stood up for yourself and you won." He was right. I had won, not just the legal case, but the larger battle. I had protected my rights, held people accountable for their crimes, and built something lasting from the wreckage. As I sat there that evening, I thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by this story. The HOA members who had learned that their board needed oversight, the legislators who had passed reform laws, the property owners who had reached out to me for advice and encouragement, the couples who had gotten married at the lodge, the readers and viewers who had followed the story and rooted for me. One person's arrogance and illegal actions had created ripples that spread far beyond my 40 acres in North Carolina. Sharon Mitchell had thought she was building a community amenity. What she actually built was a monument to the importance of respecting other people's property rights. The lodge stood as a beautiful, functional reminder that the law matters, that documents and deeds and surveys are not just paperwork, but fundamental protections of our rights, and that sometimes justice actually works the way it is supposed to. I finished my bourbon and stood up. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow I had a wedding to prepare for, and the next day, another one. The business kept growing. Life kept moving forward. But tonight, I just stood on the deck of the lodge that was never supposed to be mine, and felt grateful. Grateful that I had stood up for myself. Grateful that the system had worked. Grateful that something good had come from something bad. And grateful that I had the deed to prove it was all legally mine. The following weekend was particularly busy. I had 3 events scheduled: a wedding on Friday evening, a corporate retreat on Saturday, and a family reunion on Sunday. The lodge was getting a workout, but it held up beautifully. The structure was solid, the systems all worked well, and the guests always commented on how impressive and well-appointed everything was. During the corporate retreat, the CEO of the company pulled me aside. "This is an incredible facility," he said. "We have been looking for a venue for our annual leadership retreat. Would you be interested in a regular booking?" I absolutely was interested. We worked out a deal for them to reserve the lodge for a week every fall. It was a significant contract that would provide reliable annual income. As I worked that weekend, moving between events and making sure everything ran smoothly, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The anger I had felt when I first saw the lodge on my property had been overwhelming. The stress of the legal battle had been exhausting, but the outcome had exceeded anything I could have imagined when I first called the sheriff's office that April afternoon years ago. Rebecca stopped by one day to drop off some final paperwork related to the case. All the appeals had been exhausted, all the settlements finalized. The case was completely closed. "You know," she said as we sat in the lodge's great room, I have handled a lot of property disputes, but your case is still the most satisfying win I have ever had. The audacity of what they did was just staggering." "Do you think Sharon really meant that apology?" I asked. Rebecca thought about it. "I think she did. I have seen her type before. They get so caught up in their own authority and importance that they convince themselves the rules do not apply to them. When reality finally hits them, it is devastating. She lost her marriage, her reputation, her position in the community. She has criminal convictions on her record. That is a heavy price to pay for arrogance. Do you think she would do it again if she had the chance?" "No," Rebecca said. "I think she learned her lesson the hard way. Most people only need to learn it once when the consequences are that severe." After Rebecca left, I walked around the lodge doing my usual maintenance checks. I straightened furniture, checked that all the appliances were working, made sure the bathrooms were stocked with supplies. These were routine tasks now, but they still felt meaningful. This building, which had been forced onto my property without permission, had become something I took pride in. I maintained it well, improved it where I could, and made sure every guest had a great experience. The irony was not lost on me. Sharon and the HOA had built this lodge, intending it to be a prestigious amenity for their members. Instead, it had become my business, my livelihood, and I was the one who decided who got to use it. Life had a sense of humor sometimes. Years continued to pass. I watched Pine Ridge Estates from a distance. The HOA seemed to be running more smoothly under new leadership. They had learned expensive lessons about oversight and accountability. Tom Chen served as president for several years before passing the role to someone else. The development maintained its property values and attracted good residents. But everyone who lived there knew the story of the lodge, and it served as a permanent reminder of what could go wrong when HOA boards operated without proper checks and balances. My own property continued to thrive. The wedding venue became known throughout the region as one of the premier locations for events. I won awards from local business organizations. I was featured in wedding magazines and event planning publications. The lodge that had been built illegally on my land became one of the most recognized and respected venues in western North Carolina. I also made sure to give back to the community. I donated a percentage of my profits to local charities. I offered discounted rates for nonprofit events. I hired local vendors and suppliers whenever possible. The lodge became not just my business, but a community asset, which felt right somehow. One autumn afternoon, I was walking my property boundary with a new survey team. I did this every few years now, just to make absolutely sure I knew where my lines were. After everything that had happened, I was vigilant about protecting my property rights. As we walked, the surveyor asked me about the lodge. "That is the famous building, right? The one the HOA built without permission?" "That is the one," I said. "I have used that case in training sessions," he said. "It is a perfect example of why property surveys matter and why you should always verify ownership before doing anything on land." Even years later, my case was still being taught as a cautionary tale. That felt like a legacy worth having. As time went on, I expanded my thinking about the property. I had 40 acres, and the lodge only occupied about 2 of them. I began developing trails through the wooded portions for guests to use. I added a small amphitheater for outdoor ceremonies. I created a meditation garden with native plants. Each addition made the property more valuable and more useful. I also became more involved in local politics. I served on the county planning board for a few years, where I made sure that property rights were respected and that developments followed proper procedures. I pushed for clearer regulations around HOAs and their powers. I wanted to make sure that what happened to me would be harder for someone else to experience. The lodge stood as the centerpiece of everything I had built. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that April afternoon when I first came home and saw it sitting on my land. I remembered the shock, the anger, the disbelief. I remembered the fight to reclaim my property and hold people accountable. And I remembered the moment when the judge ruled in my favor and I realized I was going to win. That moment had changed my life. It had taught me that standing up for your rights matters, that the legal system can work when you have the facts and the law on your side, and that sometimes the worst violations can lead to unexpected opportunities. Sharon's crime had been serious. She had forged documents, lied to people, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a project that was fundamentally illegal. She had put her own desires above the law and above other people's rights. And she had paid for it with her reputation, her marriage, her freedom, and her future. But from that crime had come something good. A successful business, jobs for local workers, a beautiful venue for people's most important celebrations, legal reforms that protected other property owners, and a story that continued to educate and inspire people years after it happened. As I moved into the next phase of my life, the lodge remained constant. It was more than a building. It was a symbol of justice, of perseverance, of the importance of standing up for what is right. Every wedding, every corporate event, every family gathering held there was a celebration not just of whatever the guests were honoring, but of the principle that our property rights matter and must be protected. I never forgot where the lodge came from. I never forgot the fight it took to keep my land and to make Sharon and the HOA face the consequences of their actions. But I also never let that define me in a negative way. I took the situation that had been forced on me and made it into something positive. And every single day, as I drove up that gravel road to the lodge, I felt satisfied, knowing that the deed with my name on it was safely filed away, that every inch of my 40 acres belonged to me, and that no HOA would ever again make the mistake of thinking they could take what was mine. The story of the lodge spread far beyond North Carolina. It became a case study in law schools. It was cited in legislative debates in multiple states. It inspired reforms in HOA governance across the country. And it gave courage to countless property owners who faced similar battles, showing them that it was possible to stand up to institutions that overstepped their authority and to win. For me, it was simply my life. The life that began with an outrageous crime committed on my property and evolved into a meaningful career and a successful business. The life that taught me I was stronger than I knew and more capable than I had imagined. The life that would never have happened if Sharon Mitchell and the Pine Ridge Estates HOA had not made the catastrophic mistake of building a luxury lodge on land they did not own. I let them finish decorating. I let them pour hundreds of thousands of dollars into furnishings and fixtures. I let them complete every detail of their dream community amenity. And then I showed up with the sheriff, asserted my rights, and took it all. In the end, justice was served. The law worked. And I walked away with a luxury lodge on land I owned, free and clear, built with someone else's money, and turned it into a legacy that would last for decades. That was my story. That was my victory. And every time I unlocked the front door of that lodge, I smiled, knowing that it was mine, legally and completely, and that no one could ever take it away from me.